Have you ever realized the value of something precious only after it was gone forever? The autumn rain fell steadily against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive suite on the 42nd floor of Kang Tower in Gangnam. Min Ji-won stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her navy blue suit, her eyes fixed on a point just past her employer's shoulder. She had learned, over the past 4 years, how to make herself invisible when necessary. It was a skill she had perfected, along with anticipating his coffee preferences, managing his impossible schedule, and understanding his moods better than he understood them himself. Kang Tae-jun, the 34-year-old CEO of Kang Industries, sat behind his glass desk reviewing quarterly reports, without actually seeing the numbers. Ji-won noticed the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped an irregular rhythm on the armrest. She knew what it meant. After 4 years as his executive secretary, she could read him like others read weather forecasts. She remembered exactly when she had fallen in love with him. It wasn't the cliched moment of their first meeting, though that had been memorable enough. 3 weeks into her job, she had found him alone in his office at 2 a.m, staring at a photograph of his late father, the company founder who had died in a plane crash 6 months earlier. Tae-jun had looked up, surprised to see her there. Instead of asking why she was working so late, he had simply said quietly that he missed his father's guidance. That vulnerability, shown for just a moment before his professional mask slipped back into place, had been her undoing. She had fallen in love with the man beneath the CEO, the one who worked 18-hour days not for power, but from a deep sense of responsibility to the 15,000 employees whose livelihoods depended on his decisions. "Secretary Min, cancel my afternoon meetings," Tae-jun said suddenly, his voice breaking through her thoughts. His tone was careful, controlled, too controlled. "Someone important will be arriving this afternoon. I need the office available." Ji-won's pen paused fractionally over her tablet before she nodded. "Of course, President Kang. May I ask who will be visiting so I can prepare appropriately?" There was a pause that lasted 3 seconds too long. "Yoon Se-ra will be returning from Paris. She'll want to catch up after so many years abroad." The name hit Ji-won like cold water. Yoon Se-ra. The name she had heard whispered by the older executives who remembered when Tae-jun had been different, before his father's death, and the weight of the company had changed him. The woman who had left him 10 years ago to pursue fashion design in Paris, who had never looked back even when Tae-jun's world had collapsed. "I understand," Ji-won said, her voice betraying nothing. "I'll arrange for refreshments and ensure privacy. The usual conference room, or would you prefer your office?" "My office." And Ji-won. He looked up at her directly for the first time that morning, and she saw something in his eyes she couldn't quite identify. Regret? Anticipation? Arrange for flowers, white lilies. They were always her favorite. Ji-won bowed slightly and left the office, her heels clicking precisely against the marble floor. In the elevator down to the 38th floor where her smaller office was located, she allowed herself exactly 15 seconds to close her eyes and breathe deeply. Then she opened them, straightened her shoulders, and made the calls necessary to rearrange her boss's day around a woman from his past. By 3 o'clock, everything was perfect. The lilies stood in a crystal vase by the window, their scent subtle but present. The coffee service was prepared with Se-ra's preferred blend, information Ji-won had extracted from old expense reports from a decade ago. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting the office in golden light. Ji-won was reviewing contracts in her office when the receptionist called to announce Se-ra's arrival. She rose smoothly, checked her appearance in the small mirror by her desk, and walked to the elevator lobby to meet their guest. Yoon Se-ra was everything Ji-won had imagined and worse. Tall, elegant, dressed in what was clearly a custom Parisian design, she moved through the corporate lobby as if she owned it. Her hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, and her smile was practiced but warm as she extended her hand to Ji-won. "You must be Tae-jun's secretary." Sarah said, her Korean tinged with a slight French accent that somehow made her seem even more worldly. He mentioned in his email that you've been with him for several years. How wonderful that he has such dedicated staff. Secretary Min Ji-won, Ji-won replied, bowing respectfully. Welcome back to Seoul, Ms. Yoon. President Kang is expecting you. Please follow me. As they walked toward the executive elevator, Sarah chatted easily about her flight, about how much Seoul had changed in her absence, about the upcoming Seoul Fashion Week, where her designs would be featured. Ji-won listened politely, responded appropriately, and tried not to notice how Sarah's eyes lit up as they approached Taejun's office. Ji-won knocked once and opened the door. Taejun stood by the window, and when he turned to face Sarah, Ji-won saw an expression on his face she had never seen before. Not the focused intensity he wore during negotiations, not the tired determination of late nights, not even the rare, genuine smile he gave when a project succeeded beyond expectations. This was something else entirely. This was the look of a man seeing his past walk back into his present, bringing with it all the might-have-beens he had carefully buried. Sarah, he said, and his voice held a warmth Ji-won had never heard directed at her. Taejun. Sarah moved forward gracefully. It's been far too long. Ji-won closed the door softly behind her, leaving them alone. She returned to her desk and stared at her computer screen without seeing it. After exactly 90 minutes, her phone buzzed. Taejun's text was brief. Please arrange dinner reservations at Bachena in Cheongdam-dong for 2 at 7. And clear my morning schedule tomorrow. I'll need it open. Ji-won made the reservations at the Michelin-starred restaurant, knowing it would be nearly impossible to secure a table on such short notice. But she had cultivated relationships across the city precisely for moments like this. Within 10 minutes, it was arranged. She texted back a confirmation and received only a thumbs-up emoji in response. That night, alone in her modest apartment in Mapogu, Ji-won stood on her small balcony and looked out at the glittering skyline of Seoul. Somewhere out there, in an exclusive restaurant in Cheongdam-dong, her boss was having dinner with the woman who had left him a decade ago. Ji-won wondered if Sarah had any idea how much Taejun had struggled after his father's death, how many nights he had worked until dawn, how he had transformed his grief into the driving force that had doubled the company's value in 6 years. Probably not. Sarah had been building her own empire in Paris while Taejun had been building his in Seoul. Their paths had diverged completely, and yet here Sarah was, walking back into his life, as if 10 years meant nothing, and Taejun was welcoming her return with open arms and white lilies. Over the following weeks, Sarah became a regular presence at Kang Industries. She was consulting on the company's upcoming luxury brand launch, using her Paris connections and fashion expertise to guide their marketing strategy. It was a logical collaboration, mutually beneficial. Ji-won told herself this repeatedly as she arranged meetings, booked restaurants, and watched Taejun smile more in those few weeks than she had seen in 4 years. Secretary Min? Sarah stopped by Ji-won's office one afternoon, her smile friendly but assessing. I need a small favor. I'm hosting a dinner party this weekend at my family's home in Pyeongchang-dong, and I'd love for Taejun to attend. Could you check his schedule? Ji-won pulled up the calendar. President Kang has a charity gala Saturday evening, the annual Scholarship Foundation event. It's been on his calendar for 6 months. Sarah's smile didn't waver. Oh, that's unfortunate. Well, perhaps he could stop by my dinner afterward, even for an hour. I'll be introducing him to some potential European partners who are in town. It could be valuable for the luxury brand launch. I'll mention it to him, Ji-won said neutrally. When she did, Taejun barely looked up from the contract he was reviewing. Tell Sarah I'll make an appearance after the gala, and Ji-won, you should attend the gala as well. I'll need someone to help manage the scholarship recipients and their families. It's always overwhelming. This wasn't unusual. Ji-won often accompanied Taejun to major events, serving as a buffer and facilitator. What was unusual was his distraction as he said it. His mind clearly already at Sarah's dinner party, rather than the scholarship gala that was supposed to be the highlight of his evening. The gala was held at the Shilla Hotel in Jiangcheongdong. Ji-won wore a simple but elegant dark gray dress, professional enough to blend into the background while still being appropriate for the formal event. She watched Taejun give his speech about education and opportunity, watched him shake hands with donors and scholarship recipients, watched him check his watch 3 times in 15 minutes. At 9:30, he found her near the dessert table where she was helping an elderly donor locate her coat check ticket. "I need to leave for Sarah's dinner," he said quietly. "Can you handle the rest of the evening?" "Of course," Ji-won replied. "There's only the closing remarks and the final auction results to announce. I can manage." He nodded, already turning away, then paused and looked back. "You look nice tonight, Ji-won. That color suits you." Then he was gone, leaving Ji-won standing there with a coat check ticket in her hand and an unexpected compliment echoing in her mind. She pushed the moment away and focused on her duties, delivering closing remarks on Taejun's behalf, announcing the final auction totals, and ensuring every guest left satisfied. It was past midnight when she finally made it back to her apartment. Her phone buzzed as she was taking off her heels. A text from Taejun. "Thank you for handling tonight. Sarah's connections were valuable. The European partners are interested in our brand." Ji-won replied with a simple, "You're welcome," and set her phone aside. She looked at herself in the mirror, still wearing the gray dress he had complimented. For just a moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like to attend such events not as his secretary, but as someone who mattered to him the way Sarah clearly did. Then she carefully hung up the dress, changed into her pajamas, and reminded herself that fantasies and reality were 2 entirely different things. The pattern continued through November and into December. Sarah's presence became woven into the fabric of their professional lives. She attended board meetings, consulted on marketing strategies, and somehow always had a reason to stop by Taejun's office. Ji-won watched it all with professional detachment, or at least she told herself it was detachment, and not the slow, steady ache of watching someone you love fall for someone else. What bothered Ji-won most wasn't Sarah's presence itself, but the way it changed Taejun. He became someone slightly different, someone more carefree, more willing to leave work early, more likely to smile. It was good to see him happy. Ji-won told herself this repeatedly. She wanted him to be happy. The fact that his happiness came from someone else was something she would learn to accept. Until the day everything changed. It started ordinarily enough. Sarah had called Ji-won directly, asking her to deliver some fabric samples to Taejun's office. Ji-won collected them from Sarah's temporary studio space in Gangnam and brought them up to the executive floor. The door to Taejun's office was slightly ajar, and she was about to knock when she heard Sarah's voice from inside, intimate and warm. "Do you remember when we used to talk about opening a boutique together?" Sarah was saying. "You were going to handle the business side, and I would design. We were going to call it T&S. So naive, weren't we?" Taejun's response was quieter, but Ji-won could hear the smile in his voice. "I remember. We had grand plans. Then life got in the way. I'm sorry I left when I did," Sarah said softly. "The timing was terrible, right after your father's death. But I was 24 and terrified of being trapped in a life I hadn't chosen. I needed to see if I could make it on my own." "I understand that now," Taejun replied. "I was angry for a long time, but I get it. We were both so young." There was a pause. Then Sarah spoke again. "What if we had a second chance? Not to be those naive 20-somethings, but as the people we've become. Would you want that?" Ji-won didn't wait to hear Taejun's answer. She set the fabric samples quietly on her assistant's desk, with a note to deliver them, and returned to her office. Her hands were steady as she opened her laptop and began drafting a letter of resignation. She had known, intellectually, that this moment would come eventually. Seira's return had made it inevitable, but knowing something and experiencing it were vastly different things. Jiwon had spent 4 years being the person Taijun could rely on, the one who understood him, the one who made his impossible schedule possible, and his stressful days bearable. And in all that time, she had been lying to herself, pretending that being indispensable was the same as being loved. It wasn't. It never had been. She worked late that night, later than usual, finishing every pending project and organizing all her files so that her replacement would have an easy transition. At 11 o'clock, she printed her resignation letter, placed it in an envelope, and set it on top of a stack of completed reports on Taijun's desk. He had already left for the evening, having dinner with Seira according to his calendar. The next morning, Jiwon arrived at her usual time to find Taijun already in his office, her resignation letter in his hand. His expression was difficult to read as he looked up at her. "Come in," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Close the door." Jiwon entered and stood in her usual spot, hands clasped, eyes on a point past his shoulder. Professional, detached, safe. "What is this?" Taijun held up the letter. "My resignation, sir. I'm providing the standard 4 weeks' notice as required by my contract. I've documented all current projects and can train my replacement during the transition period." "Why?" The single word was sharp. "I believe it's time for me to pursue other opportunities. I've been with Kang Industries for 4 years, and while I've valued the experience, I think it's important to continue growing professionally." "That's corporate speak, Jiwon. Give me the real reason." He stood, moving around the desk to face her directly. "Did someone offer you another position? Are you unhappy with your compensation? What is this really about?" For the first time in 4 years, Jiwon met his eyes directly, not as his secretary, but as herself, Min Jiwon, the woman who had loved him quietly and hopelessly for far too long. "It's time for me to go. That's all there is to it." Something flickered across his face. Confusion? Hurt. But it was gone before she could identify it. "I don't accept this resignation. Whatever the problem is, we can solve it. Name your terms." "There are no terms, President Kang. Some situations can't be negotiated." She bowed slightly. "If you'll excuse me, I have work to complete." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Jiwon, wait." The use of her given name, without her title, made her pause. "I need you here. The company needs you. I can't do this without you." She looked back at him over her shoulder. "Yes, you can. You're one of the most capable people I've ever met. You'll find someone else to manage your schedule and coordinate your meetings. It's not difficult work." "It's not about the work," he said, and for a moment he sounded almost desperate. But then Seira's voice came from the outer office, calling out a greeting to the staff, and whatever Taijun had been about to say was lost. His expression closed off, returning to the professional mask Jiwon knew so well. "We'll discuss this later," he said formally. "For now, please maintain your usual duties." "Of course, President Kang." Jiwon left his office, passing Seira in the hallway with a polite nod. Seira barely glanced at her, already focused on Taijun's office door. The following 3 weeks were a study in professional courtesy and personal distance. Taijun tried several times to discuss her resignation, but Jiwon deflected each attempt with corporate efficiency. She trained her replacement, a capable young woman named Park Soo-min, who was eager and competent. She organized files, documented procedures, and systematically removed herself from the architecture of Taijun's daily life. Seira, meanwhile, seemed to bloom. She and Taijun were seen together frequently at business and social events. The gossip columns began speculating about Korea's most eligible bachelor, finally settling down with his first love. Jiwon read these articles with the same detachment she applied to quarterly reports, processing information without emotional investment. On her final day, Ji-won arrived at the office at her usual time to find an envelope on her desk. Inside was a letter from Tae-jun, handwritten rather than typed. Ji-won, it began. I've tried to understand why you're leaving, but you've been remarkably effective at keeping me at a distance these past weeks. I suppose I deserve that. I've taken you for granted, assumed you would always be here, organizing my chaos and making the impossible possible. I realize now how selfish that was. You deserve recognition for everything you've contributed, not just to this company, but to me personally. You've been more than a secretary. You've been a trusted advisor, a reliable presence, and the person who kept me grounded when the pressure threatened to overwhelm me. I hope wherever you go next, they appreciate you as much as you deserve. I'm sorry I didn't tell you that more often. I'm sorry for many things, actually. I wish you every success, Tae-jun. Ji-won read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in her bag. It was a kind letter, sincere in its way. It was also completely blind to the real reason she was leaving. But that was fine. Some things were better left unsaid. She spent her last day tying up loose ends and saying goodbye to colleagues. At 5 o'clock, she placed her company ID and access cards on her former desk, now occupied by Park Soo-min. Tae-jun was in a meeting with Se-ra and the European partners, so Ji-won left without a final goodbye. Perhaps that was easier for both of them. She had accepted a position at a smaller tech startup in Bundang, a company developing educational software. It was a complete change from the corporate luxury brand world of Kang Industries, but that was precisely the point. Ji-won needed distance, needed something completely different to help her reset her life. The new job was challenging in different ways. The startup culture was casual and collaborative, vastly different from the hierarchical formality of Kang Industries. Her new boss, Lee Jae-hyuk, was a 38-year-old former teacher who had founded the company with a mission to make quality education accessible to all students regardless of economic background. He was passionate, idealistic, and completely unlike Tae-jun, which was exactly what Ji-won needed. 3 months passed. Ji-won settled into her new role, found satisfaction in work that felt meaningful, and slowly began to rebuild her identity as something other than Kang Tae-jun's indispensable secretary. She made new friends among her colleagues, started taking a pottery class on weekends, and discovered she actually enjoyed having time for hobbies. She didn't follow the news about Kang Industries or Tae-jun. It was a conscious choice, a boundary she maintained for her own well-being. So when her former colleague Kim Min-soo called her one March evening, she was unprepared for what he had to say. "Ji-won, I thought you should know," Min-soo said without preamble. The luxury brand launch failed, spectacularly. Se-ra's designs didn't resonate with the Korean market at all. Too European, critics said. Not authentic. The company lost hundreds of millions of won. The board is furious. Ji-won felt a twist of concern despite herself. Is Tae-jun all right? Honestly, no. He's been different since you left. Less focused, making uncharacteristic mistakes. And now this disaster with Se-ra's brand. There's talk she's already looking at opportunities in Shanghai, like Paris all over again. And Ji-won, there's something else. President Kang has been trying to reach you. Your number is disconnected. I changed my number when I changed jobs, Ji-won said, which was true. She had wanted a clean break, a fresh start. Why is he trying to reach me? Min-soo hesitated. He wouldn't say. But Ji-won, I've never seen him like this. He looks lost. Park Soo-min is competent, but she's not you. No one could be you. After they hung up, Ji-won sat on her balcony, looking out at a different view of Seoul than the one from her old apartment. She felt sympathy for Tae-jun's professional troubles, but it wasn't her problem anymore. She had moved on. She had built a new life. Going back would be a mistake. And yet, she couldn't quite shake the concern Min-soo's call had awakened. 2 weeks later, Ji-won was leaving her office in Bundang when she found someone waiting by her car. Even in the dim parking garage lighting, she recognized him immediately. Taijun looked thinner than she remembered, his suit less perfectly pressed, his hair slightly disheveled as if he had been running his hands through it. "Hello, Ji-won," he said quietly. She stopped several feet away, keeping a safe distance. "President Kang, this is unexpected. You changed your number. You blocked me on social media. You made it remarkably difficult to find you." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I had to call in several favors to track down where you were working." "I wanted a fresh start," Ji-won said simply. "Clean break, new chapter. I'm sorry if that caused inconvenience." Inconvenience. He repeated the word as if tasting it. "Ji-won, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I need to talk to you. Really talk. Not the professional conversations we always had where you anticipated my needs and solved my problems before I even articulated them. I'm not your secretary anymore. I'm not sure what we would have to discuss." Everything collapsed, he said bluntly. The luxury brand launch was a disaster. Sarah left for Shanghai 2 weeks ago. The board is questioning my judgment. And I realized something. I realized that for the past 3 months, I've been trying to fill a Ji-won-shaped hole in my life. And it's impossible because you weren't just my secretary. You were the person who understood me better than anyone else, including myself. You were my ally, my confidant, the person who made everything work. And I took all of that completely for granted until you were gone. Ji-won felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "You're stressed because of work. That's understandable. But hiring a good executive assistant will solve that problem." Park Soo-min seemed very capable. "This isn't about finding a capable assistant, Ji-won. This is about the fact that I didn't realize until you left, that I had fallen in love with you somewhere along the way." The parking garage was silent, except for the distant hum of traffic from the street level. Ji-won stared at him, unable to process what he had just said. "Don't," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please don't do this. Don't tell you the truth. Don't admit that I was an idiot who was so fixated on recapturing the past with Sarah that I completely failed to see the present. That I had someone extraordinary right beside me the entire time, and I treated you like convenient furniture. You're only saying this because Sarah left and your business venture failed," Ji-won said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You're lonely and stressed, and you're confusing professional competence with personal feelings. I was good at my job. That's all it was." "No." Taejun stepped closer. "You were so much more than good at your job, Ji-won. You knew I took my coffee black in the morning but with cream after lunch when I was tired. You knew I got headaches from artificial lighting and needed to walk outside for 15 minutes when major decisions were pending. You knew I was most creative between 10 and midnight, most strategic before dawn, most prone to mistakes when I skipped lunch. You knew all of this not because it was in some manual, but because you paid attention, because you cared." "That was my job," Ji-won insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Was it your job to stay until midnight helping me prepare for board meetings? Was it your job to bring me dinner when I was too focused to remember to eat? Was it your job to find my father's favorite poetry book and leave it on my desk the day before the anniversary of his death? With no note, just letting me know you remembered." Ji-won felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Stop, please." "I can't stop, Ji-won. I've been stopping for 4 years. Stopping myself from acknowledging how much I relied on you, how much I looked forward to seeing you each morning, how much your quiet competence and steady presence meant to me. I stopped myself because you were my secretary, and I thought that mattered. I thought professional boundaries were more important than honest feelings. I was wrong." "It's too late," Ji-won said, but even as she said it, she felt the truth of what he was saying resonating with her own carefully buried feelings. "I've moved on. I have a new job, a new life. You can't just show up and expect me to come running back because you finally figured out your feelings." "I don't expect anything," Taejun said quietly. "I just needed you to know. I needed to tell you that I was blind and foolish, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't see you, really see you, until you were gone. I'm sorry I let Sarah's return make me forget what was right in front of me. I'm sorry I took your dedication for granted and never once asked what you wanted or needed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. I brought you something. It's not a grand gesture, just something I thought you might like. You don't have to accept it, but I wanted you to have it regardless. Ji-won opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with a single charm, a small book. She recognized it immediately. It was a replica of her favorite novel's cover, a book she had once mentioned reading during her lunch break. He had remembered. You said it was about a woman who had to leave everything behind to find herself, Taejun said softly, and that it ended with her realizing she had the strength she needed all along. I thought of you when I saw this. You always had that strength, Ji-won. I just wish I had appreciated it when you were beside me. Ji-won closed the box and held it carefully. What do you want from me, Taejun? I want you to be happy, he said simply. If that means staying here with your new job and your fresh start, then I'll accept that. But if there's any chance that you might consider giving me another opportunity, not as your employer, but as someone who cares about you, as someone who wants to be worthy of caring about you, then I'm asking for that chance. Ji-won looked at him for a long moment, this man she had loved quietly for so long, seeing him now with clear eyes. He looked tired, uncertain, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. This wasn't the confident CEO who commanded boardrooms and built business empires. This was just Kang Taejun, stripped of pretense, asking for something he wasn't sure he deserved. I loved you for 4 years, Ji-won said quietly. Every day I came to work, I loved you a little more. And every day I watched you not see me, not as Min Ji-won, but as Secretary Min. Do you know how much that hurt? To be so close to someone, to know them so intimately, and to be completely invisible to them as a person. I can't imagine, Taejun said, and she could hear the genuine remorse in his voice. But I'd like to try to understand. I'd like to try to be someone who sees you, who appreciates you, who doesn't take you for granted. I don't know if I'll be good at it. I'm better at balance sheets than emotions, but I want to try. Why should I believe this is real? Ji-won asked. Why should I believe this isn't just you feeling lonely and vulnerable because everything fell apart with Sarah and the business? You shouldn't believe it based on words alone, Taejun admitted. Words are easy. Actions matter more. So I'm not asking you to come back to Kang Industries. I'm not asking you to give up your new life. I'm just asking if I can see you. Coffee, dinner, whatever you're comfortable with. Let me show you, not tell you, that I've changed. That I finally understand what I lost when you walked away. Ji-won felt the careful walls she had built around her heart beginning to crack. She had moved on, built a new life, found satisfaction in her new work. But she had done all of that while carrying the weight of unresolved feelings. Maybe it was time to finally address them, one way or another. One coffee, she said finally. That's all I'm agreeing to. One conversation as equals, not as employer and employee. And Taejun, if this is just about you feeling lost because your plans fell apart, I need you to figure that out now. I can't be someone's second choice or rebound person. I did that for 4 years already. You were never my second choice, Taejun said firmly. I was just too stupid to realize you were my first choice all along. But I understand. One coffee. I'll take it. When are you free? Saturday afternoon. There's a cafe near Bundang Station. Meet me there at 3 o'clock. I'll be there, Taejun promised. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back. Thank you, Ji-won, for giving me this chance. I won't waste it. After he left, Ji-won sat in her car for a long time, the small box with the bracelet resting in her palm. She felt scared and hopeful and uncertain all at once. This could be a terrible mistake, or it could be the beginning of something real, built on honesty, rather than unspoken longing. She wouldn't know unless she tried. Saturday came, and Ji-won arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. She wore jeans and a comfortable sweater, deliberately casual, deliberately different from the professional secretary she had been. When Taejun arrived, he was also dressed casually, in slacks and a simple button-down shirt with no tie. He looked nervous, which was oddly endearing. They ordered coffee and found a quiet corner table. For the first few minutes, the conversation was awkward as they navigated this new dynamic. But gradually they found their rhythm, talking not about business or schedules but about themselves. Taejun told her about the pressure he felt after his father's death, how he had thrown himself into work as a way to avoid grieving. Ji-won told him about growing up in a small town in Gangwon province, about her dreams of making a difference in education. "Why education software?" Taejun asked, genuinely curious. "It seems like a big change from luxury brands and corporate strategy." "Because it matters," Ji-won said simply. "At Kang Industries, we were selling luxury goods to people who already had everything. Here, we're trying to give educational opportunities to students who might not otherwise have access to quality learning resources. It feels meaningful in a way my old work never did." "I never asked what you wanted," Taejun said quietly. "In 4 years, I never once asked what your career goals were, what mattered to you, what you dreamed about. I just assumed you were content being my secretary." "I was content," Ji-won admitted. "Or I told myself I was. Being near you was enough, until it wasn't anymore." "When did you realize you needed to leave?" Ji-won took a sip of her coffee, considering how honest to be. Then she decided that if they were doing this, they might as well do it with complete transparency. "The day Sarah asked you about a second chance, I overheard you two talking in your office. I realized then that I could spend another 4 years, or 10, or 20, being the reliable person in the background while you lived your real life with someone else. And I couldn't do it anymore." Taejun looked stricken. "What did you hear me say?" "I didn't wait to hear your answer. I left before you responded." "I told her I wasn't sure," Taejun said. "I told her that we had both changed too much, that we were different people now. And she said that was exactly why it could work, that we could build something new, based on who we'd become, rather than who we'd been. And I almost believed her. I wanted to believe her because the alternative was admitting that I had wasted 10 years pining for someone who represented a simpler past, rather than looking at my actual present." "What changed your mind?" "Everything fell apart," Taejun said bluntly. "The luxury brand launch was a disaster not because Sarah's designs were bad, but because they were wrong for our market. They were beautiful, but disconnected from Korean aesthetics and values. I had let my personal feelings override my business judgment, and it cost the company hundreds of millions of won. The board was furious. Sarah, faced with failure, immediately started looking for opportunities elsewhere. Just like before, when things got difficult, she looked for an exit." He paused, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "And I realized that in all those months she was back, she never once asked about my father, about how I had coped with his death, about what it had been like to suddenly be responsible for an entire company at 28 years old. She talked about Paris, about fashion, about her career. But she never asked about my life, about what had shaped me in her absence. And I realized that Sarah loved a version of me that didn't exist anymore, maybe never really existed. She loved the idea of us, the romance of first love. But she didn't love the actual person I had become. And then one day I was looking through old photos on my phone, and I found pictures from various company events over the years. And in the background of so many of them, there you were. Not posing for the camera, just there, making sure everything ran smoothly. And I realized that you had been there for every important moment of my professional life, For 4 years. You had been my constant when everything else was chaos. And I had never once told you how much that meant to me. Jiwon felt tears threatening, but blinked them back. I don't need gratitude, Taejun. I chose to work hard. I chose to stay late. That was my decision. But why did you choose it? He asked gently. Why did you go so far above and beyond what your job required? She met his eyes directly. Because I loved you. Because watching you succeed made me happy. Because being useful to you felt like a way to be close to you when I knew I couldn't have anything more. And now? His voice was quiet, careful. Do you still feel that way? Jiwon took a deep breath. I don't know. I spent 3 months trying to move on, building a new life, convincing myself I was over you. And I was doing okay. But then you showed up in that parking garage looking lost. And all those feelings I thought I had buried came rushing back. So I honestly don't know, Taejun. I don't know if what I feel is love or just habit or nostalgia for something that was never really mine to begin with. Then let's figure it out together, Taejun suggested. No rush, no pressure. Just 2 people spending time together and seeing where it leads. No employer-employee dynamic. No hidden feelings. Just honest communication. Can we try that? Jiwon considered this. It was risky. Opening herself up again meant potentially getting hurt again. But it also meant the possibility of something real, something mutual, something built on equal footing rather than professional hierarchy. Okay, she said finally. We can try. But Taejun, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person who left Kang Industries 3 months ago. I've changed. I've found work that fulfills me. I've discovered parts of myself that I had suppressed. I won't go back to being the invisible secretary who derives her value from being useful to someone else. I don't want you to, Taejun assured her. I want to get to know this version of you, the woman who chose meaningful work over a high-paying position. The woman who had the courage to leave when staying would have been easier. The woman who values herself enough to demand to be seen and appreciated. They talked for 3 hours that afternoon, long after their coffee had gone cold. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. They talked about books and movies and whether Seoul was a better city for walking or driving. They talked about everything and nothing, the way people do when they're discovering each other for the first time. When they finally left the cafe, Taejun walked Jiwon to her car. Can I see you again? He asked. Next weekend? Maybe dinner this time? Dinner sounds nice, Jiwon agreed. But I picked the restaurant. Somewhere casual. No Michelin stars or celebrity chefs. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Deal. You choose. I'll follow. Over the next several months, Jiwon and Taejun built something new together. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when old patterns threatened to resurface. When Taejun slipped into CEO mode, and Jiwon found herself automatically deferring to his judgment. But they caught themselves, reminded each other that this was different, that they were building something based on equality and mutual respect. Taejun began making changes at Kang Industries. He promoted from within, brought in diverse perspectives, and started a mentorship program to develop young talent. He scaled back the luxury brand division and refocused on the company's core strengths. Slowly, the business stabilized and began growing again, this time on a more sustainable foundation. Jiwon thrived in her new role. The educational software company secured major contracts with several school districts, and her work directly impacted thousands of students. She found satisfaction in knowing that her efforts made a tangible difference in people's lives. They kept their relationship private at first, both needing time to figure out what they were building without external pressure. But gradually, they began attending events together, introducing each other to their respective friend groups, weaving their separate lives into something shared. One evening, about 8 months after that first coffee meeting, They were walking along the Han River in Yeouido. The autumn air was crisp, the city lights reflecting off the water in shimmering patterns. Taijun suddenly stopped and turned to face Jiwon. "I need to tell you something," he said seriously. "And I need you to listen to all of it before you respond." Jiwon felt a flutter of nervousness but nodded. "Okay. I know I hurt you. I know that for 4 years I was blind and selfish and took you completely for granted. I know that I let Sarah's return make me forget what was right in front of me. I know that I made you feel invisible and undervalued and like your feelings didn't matter. And I know that no matter how much time passes, that pain doesn't just disappear." He paused, taking her hands in his. "But I want you to know that you taught me something crucial. You taught me that love isn't just grand gestures and romantic declarations. It's showing up every day. It's paying attention to the small things. It's anticipating needs and offering support, and being there through the mundane as well as the dramatic. You showed me what real love looks like through your actions, even though I was too stupid to recognize it at the time. And now I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that same kind of love. I want to pay attention to what matters to you. I want to support your dreams the way you supported mine. I want to be someone you can rely on, not because it's my job, but because it's my choice. Because loving you is the easiest and most important choice I've ever made." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a simple but elegant ring, a single diamond set in platinum. "Min Jiwon, will you marry me? Not my secretary, not my assistant, but my partner, my equal, my love. Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you?" Jiwon looked at the ring, then at Taijun's face, seeing the hope and vulnerability and love there. She thought about the girl she had been 4 years ago, the one who had fallen in love with her boss and settled for being invisible. She thought about the woman she had become, the one who had found the courage to leave and build her own life. And she thought about the future she could build with this man who had finally learned to see her. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you." Taejun slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. They stood there by the river, holding each other as the city moved around them, two people who had finally found their way to each other, not through grand romantic gestures, but through patience, growth, and the willingness to see and be seen. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony at a Hanok guest house in Bukchon. It was intimate and personal, attended only by close friends and family. Jiwon wore a simple but elegant hanbok in soft ivory, and Taijun wore a traditional navy blue hanbok. They wrote their own vows, promising not perfection but honesty, not grand gestures but daily attention, not possession but partnership. During the reception, Min-soo, who had become one of Taijun's closest friends, gave a speech. "I watched these two dance around each other for 4 years," he said with a grin. Watched Taijun be completely oblivious to the fact that he had found his perfect match. Watched Jiwon quietly support him while building her own strength. And I'm so glad that they finally figured out what everyone else could see, that they belong together. Later, as they slow danced to a jazz version of an old Korean ballad, Taijun whispered in Jiwon's ear, "Do you remember that first coffee meeting when you agreed to give me a chance?" "I remember being terrified," Jiwon admitted. "Terrified that you were just lonely, that this wasn't real, that I was setting myself up for more heartbreak. And now? Now I know that losing you was the best thing that could have happened," Jiwon said, smiling up at him. "Because it forced both of us to grow. It forced you to recognize what mattered. And it forced me to value myself enough, to demand to be valued. We couldn't have built this if we hadn't both been willing to let go of what wasn't working. I love you, Min Jiwon," Taejun said softly. "Not because you're useful to me. Not because you make my life easier, but because you're you. Because you're brilliant and strong and kind, and you see the world in ways that make me want to be better. Because you challenge me and support me and make me laugh. Because you're my partner in every way that matters. I love you too, Ji-won replied, and I'm so glad you finally learned to see me. I'll spend every day making sure you know how much I see you, Taejun promised. Every single day for the rest of our lives. As they continued dancing, surrounded by people who loved them, Ji-won reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From invisible secretary to valued partner, from unspoken love to honest commitment, from settling for scraps of attention to demanding and receiving full respect and devotion. Years later, when people asked Ji-won about her marriage, she would tell them that the best thing she ever did was leave. That sometimes love requires distance before it can become real. That being seen and valued wasn't something you could earn through devotion, but something you had to demand through self-respect. She would tell them that Kang Tae-jun had needed to lose her to understand her value, that she had needed to leave him to understand her own, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away when you're not being loved the way you deserve. Because only when she left did he truly understand that he had lost not just a skilled secretary, but his love, his ally, and everything that mattered. And only when she left did she understand that she deserved someone who recognized her value without needing to lose her first. But in the end, they had found their way back to each other, not as employer and employee, not as the person who gives and the person who takes, but as true partners. Two people who had learned, through pain and growth, what it meant to truly see and be seen, to love and be loved, to build something real and lasting together. And that, Ji-won thought, as she rested her head on her husband's shoulder, was worth the wait.